morning, would you open up to the book of James, please? James and chapter 1. We started here last week in the book of James, and we just looked at the first 2 or 3 verses last week. What I would like to do this morning is just kind of very quickly orient you, remind you about what we talked about last week. And really last week we were in verses 2 and in verse 3, and we talked about how there are things in our lives, times in our lives where the unexpected happens, and sometimes we call them storms, sometimes we call them trials, but things happen, the phone call comes, the email is sent, the unexpected news reaches your door, the text message reaches your phone. And those times of trouble and trial in our lives just oftentimes have a way of derailing us, have a way of discouraging us, have a way of throwing us into these seasons in life of darkness, we could call them. And we talked about that for a few minutes. And really James, at the beginning of his letter, says something that is really unbelievable. And he says this to us, and this is where we spent the bulk of our time. He says, in those moments, in those seasons, when those things happen to you, when those things happen to me, that we can find joy. And it seems so odd to us, but that's what James says. He says, when those seasons come, we can, and in fact, we need to find joy in those circumstances. And just to give you a little bit more context, those circumstances are all sorts of, we talked about last week, shapes and sizes and colors, and they come in so many different forms for each of us. But James readers, we know this from just further on in the book, and some little hints that James gives us. James readers, many of them, most of them, I think we could say, were extremely poor. And in fact, they were less, or they were worse than poor. I don't think I said that properly, but anyway, they were destitute. That would be the word. They didn't have two nickels to put together. And James addresses this, and James talks about this in his book, and so they were they were on the very, 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 very edge of the lowest financial status in society, many of his readers. And as we go through the book, you'll see some of these as we go along. There's also a few of them at least that were doing quite well. And in fact, they were making it okay. They had a lot of money, a lot of funds. They could pretty much do whatever they wanted. And the book alludes to, the book talks about the fact that many of those, not necessarily Christians, but many of the people in their society, in their context, were taking advantage of those that were extremely poor. And this happened all the time in Paul's world and in Bible times. And this is just a common occurrence. They would buy off the judges. The court system was not a fair system, and so if you had money, you could pretty much guarantee with the right amount of that money, going the direction of the judge, that the outcome would be favorable. And so you could take a poor person to court over some land dispute and pretty much take their land, and there was very little that the poor person could do in that regard. In many cases, just sort of had to step back and watch this happen. And yes, it's not fair. And so part of the context here is James is saying to his readers, when things happen, when it's not fair, when things that you had nothing to do with, things that were out of your control, when people come in and take advantage of you, yes, it's hard, yes, it's frustrating, but he says to them, you can find and you need to find joy in such circumstances. And here was the reason that all of this is happening. This is the reason we need to find joy, is because those things, those trials in life, can be for you and can be for me steps towards maturity in faith. And we said it this way last week. Actually, we said it a couple different ways. But one of the things we said is that the faith we take into trials should never be the faith that we take out of trials. The faith that we take into difficult circumstances should never be the same faith that we take out of them, because God's intent is for us to grow. And the other thing that we said is you and I in those circumstances have a choice to make. We can either choose to embrace or we can choose to waste. We can choose to embrace those circumstances, those trying times, or we can choose to waste them. And not move towards maturity, not move towards growing, not move towards being any closer to God in the process of the things that happen in our lives. Now here's the thing, okay? This is where we move into this week. In the midst of those hard times, in the midst of that darkness, in the midst of those trying circumstances, there seems to be to us absolutely nothing redeemable about them. People say, you gotta find something good, you gotta find something good in the midst of this, but the thing is, when we're in those circumstances, we look about and we say, nothing good can come out of this. And in fact, it's all bad news. And in fact, it's all going off the rails. And in fact, there's absolutely nothing that I can see is opportunistic as I try to look at it, as much as I pray about it. There's nothing good that I can foresee coming out of my situation. It's sin. It's all bad. It's in my family. And what possible good could come out of this? And this is where James writes to us in verse 5. I want you to just turn there and look at it with me. If you're not there already. James chapter 1 and verse 5. James kind of continues on this theme of trials and tribulations. He says this to us. He says, But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. In the midst of your circumstances, in the midst of those places in your life where you're like, nothing good can come out of this, there's no way forward, there's no positive thing that is possible to come out of my situation, as hard as I've looked, as much as I've tried to pray about it and bring God into this situation, James says this: if you lack wisdom, ask of God. In the midst of trials, do we lack wisdom? Do I lack wisdom? Do you lack wisdom? Yes. Do we need wisdom? Of course we need wisdom. James says this: then go to God and ask for it. And here's the thing about this. When we are asking God for wisdom, the truth is, and this may be true of you, it's true of me anyway, is that what I really want, what I'm really seeking most of the time when I go to God and say, God, will you give me some wisdom, is really not wisdom. You know what I want? I want answers. I say, God, would you give me some wisdom about why this is happening? And what God has promised to give us is not answers. God has promised to give us wisdom. There's no promise for some insight into how this is miraculously going to work out for your good and for the good of God and for everyone's good. There's no promise that years down the road you're going to be looking back and saying, oh, I'm so thankful for that experience because I learned this or that. There's no promise of insight about what the future is going to hold for you. And so when James says lack wisdom, I struggle with that. Maybe you struggle with that, because really what I want, rather than wisdom, is I want answers to my situation. I want, Lord, why is this happening? Lord, why is this happening now? Lord, why is all this, sort of coming my way? It doesn't seem fair. Couldn't you break it up a little bit? One bad thing 1 week, one bad thing a few months down the road. And so what we really want oftentimes in trials and tribulations, in the midst of all those things, is answers. Answers for what we're going through, rather than wisdom. And what James says is that if you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And the Greek in in the Greek terminology there, you don't really care about this, but I'll tell you anyway. What James is saying, the Greek there is perfect present tense. And that's, it makes me sound really smart, but I just read it somewhere. So I'm not that smart. But perfect present tense, I do know this. You know what that means? It means over and over and over again. In other words, it's continual action. And what James is saying to us, if you lack wisdom, you go and you ask of God for wisdom, and you ask Him over and over and over and over again for wisdom. Solomon was in the Old Testament widely regarded as the wisest man that ever lived. And if you read some of his stories and some of his life story in the Old Testament, you would pick up pretty quickly that Solomon was a very bright guy. Solomon was a very wise man. And early on in his life as king, God came to Solomon, and God said to Solomon, He says, look, I'm going to give you the opportunity. Now, this is sort of simplifying it just a little bit. But He's saying, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask for pretty much anything you want, Solomon, and I will grant it to you. And you know what Solomon asked for? This Solomon says, I want wisdom. I mean, here my dad has reigned on the throne, David, and he has been a great leader. He's been a great king for the most part. And I'm sort of filling this role, and what I want and what I need most is wisdom. And so God granted Solomon an extraordinary amount of wisdom. And for many, many years, Solomon reigned as king over Israel, or the divided kingdom at that point. And you know what happened, though, as time went on? Solomon, it seems, stopped asking for wisdom. And as Solomon grew, and as he grew further and further away from this moment where he prayed for wisdom, Solomon started making really poor choices. Solomon kept making choices time and time again that were not honoring to his Lord. In fact, Solomon made many foolish choices, especially in the latter years of his life. In many ways, he died a fool. And so Solomon had asked for wisdom, but at some point, for some reason, Solomon stopped asking for wisdom. He stopped praying. He stopped looking. He stopped searching for God and for the wisdom that comes with Him. And as he stopped doing that, the choices that he made in his life just pushed him and moved him further and further and further away from where God wanted him to be. And then James says, ask for wisdom, but don't just say okay, Lord, give me wisdom this one time. He says you keep asking over and over and over and over and over again. If you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. Now, this next part of the verse is very, very encouraging. He says to us at the end of the second part of verse 5, he says, who gives to all, this is God gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. What does that mean? That means this, that God does not get tired of you asking for wisdom. I'm a parent. You know that. 3 girls. They ask for a lot of things. If you've ever been a parent of children, especially small children, they ask, you'll know, for a lot of stupid things. And they ask over and over and over again. And honestly, in my weaker moments, which is quite often, it's tiring. It's frustrating. It's like I just answered that question 5 minutes ago, 5 seconds ago. Do not ask me again. Don't talk to me again. You've used your quote of words for the day, so just go be somewhere quiet by yourself. And as a parent or maybe as a boss, it gets tiring and often frustrating when people keep coming over and over and over again and asking you for things. Not only when they ask you for things, but when they ask you for things that you sort of feel like, you should know the answer to that. You should be mature enough, old enough, wise enough to have figured that out. There's really no need for you to be coming and asking me this question because you ought to know. But what's really encouraging about James is that James says God does not get like that. God doesn't get like that. God's not like, okay, Brent, like you should have this figured out. You've been a pastor for many years. You shouldn't need wisdom here. You should know what to do. He doesn't get like that. He doesn't get tired of the same request over and over and over again. He doesn't get frustrated by the fact that we should have known better, that we should know the answer, that we should have done better. And in fact, he delights in giving us wisdom. He delights in helping us see the path that we ought to take. He delights in answering our prayers in that way. It says he does not get angry. He does not get upset by our continual requests time and time and time and time again. And so if you asked for wisdom 5 minutes ago, ask him again. Ask him after church. Ask him this evening. Ask him again tomorrow morning. Just keep asking and asking and asking. Over and over and over. Because he doesn't get upset. Now, if you've read ahead a verse or two, you'll notice that there is a qualification on this wisdom thing. And James gets into that in verse 6. And we're going to spend just a couple of moments there this morning. This is what James says in verse 6 and verse 7 of chapter 1. He says, "But he must ask in faith." So the person that is asking for wisdom must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. There is a qualification to the wisdom, and it sounds complicated, but it's really not as complicated as it may sound to you and to me. James says when you ask for wisdom, there has to be one thing that you just need to do if you expect to receive wisdom. He says you need to ask in faith. Ask in faith, not doubting him. What that means, he goes on in verse 8 and talks a little bit about the double-minded man. The double-minded man is the one that requests wisdom, but he's not sure that he can fully trust God. He's not sure that in the midst of his trial, his temptation, his thing that he's going through, he can really trust God to answer his prayer. And so he prays and says, God, would you give me wisdom? But yet at the same time, over here, he is trying to work things out with his own resources, with his own effort, his own energy. He doesn't trust enough to leave it in the hands of God. And then James says, when you ask for wisdom, which you should do, he says you need to have a faith. You can't doubt that God will answer. You can't doubt that God will help. You can't doubt that God will give you wisdom. For the person that is kind of double-minded or of a split mind, kind of here and yet over here, not really fully committed to God's path and to God's way and to trusting God, James says that he's like the person or the thing that's in the middle of the sea. Just imagine like a piece of plastic in the sea. You know where that piece of plastic goes? It goes wherever the wind and the waves take it. And it might be here one moment, and in a few waves later, it's over here, and it's over here, and it's over here. And so it has really no backbone, it has no stability, and so it's just all over the place. And James says, when we ask for wisdom, we need to ask for wisdom, trusting fully in the God to whom we are asking to. Isn't that, we've talked about this time and time again, the thing that God wants most from us? Isn't that the thing that even in the midst of hard times, God wants most for us? Is to trust in Him. And James says if you're going to ask for wisdom, He'll give it to you. He'll give it to you without getting angry, without saying, oh, you should know better, but I'll help you out this time anyway. He just loves to give you wisdom, but you must ask fully trusting in God. Now, we'll just look at a couple more verses this morning, and then we're going to wrap up our time together. This is what he says in verse 9. He says, but brother of humble circumstance is to glory in his high position. But the brother of humble circumstance is to glory in his high position. And the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with the scorching and the wind, and it withers the grass, and its flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man, in the midst of his pursuits, will fade away. Now this is what I think James is saying to us, and this all, in my opinion, just sort of comes together here all the way from verse 1 to these verses at the end. James is saying this: poor person of humble circumstance, person who does not have much, person who is on the very edge of being able to survive in the society that they've been placed in, who time and time again people come and they're being taken advantage of, they're not they're not cared for, nobody cares about them, society kind of has cast them out. Brother of humble circumstance, or of poverty, James says this: glory in his high position. Glory in your high position. This is what I think James is saying. Glory in God's view of you. Take pride, take comfort, glory in how God sees you. Not only does this apply to us, but think about James' original writer or readers, those he wrote to that were very poor, that are wondering what's going on. Does God love us? Does God care about us? Why do people keep taking advantage of us? Why doesn't God intervene? James says, glory in or take comfort in God's view of you. Brother, Christian, of humble circumstance. And he says something else. He says something to the rich person. He says, second, to the rich person, he says, take pride, or it says in the rich man, this is verse 10, is to glory or take glory in his humiliation, because like flowering grass he will pass away. And I think that James is saying this. He says, rich person, rich Christian, person that's doing well, person that can afford to go on trips, person that can afford to go on the cruise, that God has blessed. And it's not that they're bad people. Maybe they're not taking advantage of people, but they've just been placed in a different path. Rich Christian, rich person, you need to glory in this. You too need to glory or take pride that your identity, like the poor person, is found in God's view of you. And so on one hand, James is saying, look, if you're poor, take comfort in the fact that you can rejoice in that God sees you differently than how society sees you. And if you're rich and you're doing okay and you love the Lord too, James says to the rich person, you too need to take pride and find your identity in the fact that God sees you differently than society sees you. Here's why. Because someday all your riches is going to be gone. Someday it's all going to fade away. Someday, everything like the flowers, they come and they go. Someday, all those things that you've acquired, maybe rightly, maybe fairly, maybe even honoring the Lord doing it. One day, all those things, will be gone. And you, like the poor person, will have one thing and one thing left: your identity in Jesus Christ. Who you are in the eyes of Jesus Christ. The only thing that you will be left with is how God sees you. Rich, poor, whatever side you're on, God's view of you. Now, I think this is what James is saying to us all, and to his readers, and James up to this point. He's saying this: we would look very differently at our situations in life if we could see things the way that God sees them. Amen. And the wisdom that you need, and the wisdom that I need, is not answers about how it's all going to work out, is not answers about what my future is going to look like. The wisdom that we need is to see our situations the way that God sees our situations. And if we could see our troubles and our trials and our frustrations the same way that God sees them, you know what? We would know, we would see our whole world at this moment is just a very, very, very tiny speck, just a very tiny space in what is our lives and in what will be eternity for us. And when we're going through situations, the thing that happens, and it happens to you, it happens to me, is we're like going with just like blinders on. And it is our everything. And we can't see anything else except that because it's so hard and it's so difficult. We don't know how to work through it. And it's just like, this is our entire world. And what God wants for us to do, wants for you to do, and wants for me to do, is to be able to look with a much broader view, with the wisdom that He can give us, and to see that He is in control, to see that the situations that we are in are just a very small part of our lives, and that He is greater than them, and that He is bigger than them, and that He can take those things and use them to grow and to mature our faith. And so, brother, rich brother, poor brother, James is saying, if you sort of step back from life and are able to see things with the wisdom that God gives you through the lens of God, it changes your perspective on those trials and on those tribulations. And all of a sudden, it's just a little bit easier for us to approach them and go through them and meet them with joy, not because they're fun, but because we can see that God is bigger than them. I've told you this story before, but I'm going to tell it to you again. Maybe some of you don't remember it, some of you probably do. You ever watch horse racing on a Saturday afternoon? When did they have horse racing? I really don't know. Who watches horse racing? Anybody? Okay, because I could just make this up on the spot and you'll never know that. Okay, if you've ever seen horse racing, you've probably seen some clips or something like that. A lot of the times, as the horses are traveling on the track, things are happening so fast. You ever notice they have those like hoods on their heads? And you're like, well, why do they do that? Well, this hasn't been proven, but horse people, jockeys believe that those hoods help the horse to focus only on what's ahead. And in other words, if they didn't have one, the horse is looking at the roar of the crowd, and the horse is looking at all the horses beside him, and all these things, and it's just distracting. And so what they do is they put the hoods on the horses, and it's such a small spot for their eyes to see through that they could really, literally just see like right in front of them. Because that's all they need to see to win that race. And so nothing is going to distract them. They just know that they just need to keep traveling down that path. And here is the point of all that. When we find ourselves in difficult situations in life, we're like that horse. We just see that. We can't see anything else around us. We just focus on the problem, and it really just consumes everything we are, everything we do, everything we have, all of our energy, all of our efforts, sometimes all of our finances, and it can be really, really, really discouraging. And what God would love for you and me to do is just take a big step back and to take off the hood and take off the blinders and to look around and say, in light of my life, my entire life, in light of the eternity that comes after this life, and in light of the fact that all of our material things are going to fade away at some point, this is just a small speck, a small portion of my life. And I know that my God is bigger than it. And if I pray for wisdom, He will help me through it. He will help me, be able to perceive it in a way that sees the bigger picture. Let's pray together this morning.